So this is a presentation that we actually developed based off of interviews that we've been doing here at OUP that Jamie Testai on our team has been working on. Particularly Jamie Testai has been working on here at OUP, which is interviewing women academics and what they have gone through in their entrepreneurial journeys. So we've done 12 interviews so far of graduate students, postdocs, and faculty at various stages. You can find this blog at the place that I've noted here, but we are conducting further interviews that will be added to these as well. We had a lot of areas of focus for these particular interviews. For this particular presentation, though, we're talking about the transition from academia to startups, unique challenges that women face that may not affect their male colleagues. What are some lessons that they've had for both good and bad advice, and then their own tips for aspiring female founders. So in the interest of time, I'm actually not going to go through the profiles of the women that we've interviewed so far, but you can see this. I'm happy to send a copy of this presentation to anyone who asks for it. But I do want to jump into the content of the presentation because we're only able to take about 10 minutes of our time on this right now. So one of the things that we asked about those, their roles and responsibilities in academia versus in startup. And one of the things that came across in these interviews was how different these could be for each other. That in academia, they're focusing a lot on these linear research paths, publishing papers, attending conferences, et cetera, supervising students. But there's a long-term emphasis, there's a strong emphasis on long-term projects and gradual training of people, et cetera, and that they're really, they're the ones leading the direction of the lab. And startup leadership, they know that they have much shorter funding cycles. They're constantly having to think about, okay, we have money for a certain amount of time. What then? They need to get feedback from investors. They can't go off on tangents of things that they may think are interesting to them, but they really have to focus on where they need to get to for that next funding cycle and make a very swift action on that. People talked about how it demanded a very diverse skill set, rapid adaptation and multitasking, and managing basically multiple facets with shorter timelines. So we just have a quote on this from one of the people that we interviewed, Ramil Shah, who's actually been a speaker here before at Equalize as well. She's the co-founder of Dimension Inc. And she said that starting the company helped her hone in and identify other skills that she wasn't necessarily using all the time in academia, that she never knew she had or was good at. And that industry was really about, hugely about teamwork, that there wasn't a hierarchy that she had in these early stages of her company, that we solve and anticipate problems together. Whereas in academia, when she was running a lab, she was like, it was more about her being the last word and being more in control. She has less control in industry because there are so many moving parts, and she needed to also know her limitations and needed to find a business partner that had a really knew the background of what it is that she was working in. And so we actually interviewed her along with her co-founder for this particular interview, who was the business part of what they were starting up. So another thing we talked about in the differences between their academic roles and their startup roles was about decision-making. That in academia, it was perceived as having a slower pace with longer funding cycles, longer windows to make important decisions. Again, this is what we talked about before, that the cycles in startups tend to be much shorter and demanded quick action by investors. So Daria Moshly-Rosen, who we interviewed, who's the founder and former CSO of Kai Therapeutics. She's founded other companies as well. She's a professor at Stanford, who I've known for a long time. She talks about in academia, students are led by a professor who guides the direction of their research. Although working towards particular goals, they often find themselves taking detours on those goals. But when developing a drug in industry, everyone on the team is critical and focused on the shortest path to solve the problem, and you really couldn't take those curiosity-driven detours. Another area that was talked about by these interviewees was about communication idea protection, and that in academia, despite the fact that obviously people are focused on their work and they don't want anyone taking credit for their work, it's just much more open. Free collaboration is very supported and communicated. Whereas in the startup world, there's a need to protect proprietary information while engaging with those potential investors. And so communicating technology, and I'm sure all of our equalizers have heard this. I'm sure many of the people on this call have heard this. Communicating technology without revealing critical secrets is a challenge in the business world, and figuring out how to do that is one of the things that these academics face. So this is Theanne Shiros, the co-founder and CSO of Wherewell. She said, she quoted that, "I like to share and communicate ideas. In academia, you can pretty freely do that. You publish your paper, then you talk about it while fostering collaborations, but you always need to be careful and mindful because you want to protect your students' work." But that her biggest difference for her as an entrepreneur suddenly is that ideas are proprietary. And with VCs, it's not as friendly of an environment. It's more transactional. And the challenge was how to communicate the technology at the right level at the right time when you're having those conversations. And so it's just a different way to communicate and have conversations when she was working on her company. So we'd also asked them about these women academics, about their differences that they noticed perhaps with their male colleagues. So a number of women did bring up imposter syndrome and confidence, that they had struggles with imposter syndrome and that they needed to prove themselves more, and battling their internal doubts about their capabilities compared to their male counterparts. They also felt that there were societal expectations, perception, that there were these biases, and obviously Sarah talked about this a little bit earlier. Sometimes they are obviously quite unconscious biases that people have, especially in more male-dominated fields. So there's a great quote that we had from Claire Watts about this, who is the CEO and co-founder. She said, women, young women especially, are not what people particularly picture when they think of tech entrepreneurs. And so there's often this initial reaction or surprise, sometimes at the first time someone meets you, that they don't quite know what to expect and can be slightly dismissive. And often that just is overcome. Again, Sarah talked about this too, about talking about your technology and your company. But it can be tough as the founder, entering those conversations, knowing that you're not the expectation. Another thing that these women brought up was gender awareness and advocacy. Some of these entrepreneurs expressed a desire not to be labeled as solely female entrepreneurs. They just want to be seen as entrepreneurs. And they obviously would like to see societal treatment changed for women in these fields with regards to that, and basically not be seen as their gender particularly first. Oops. And at the same time, for women who are entrepreneurs, there's also this pressure of representation that many female entrepreneurs mentioned, that they had this weight of representing their gender in their respective fields, and that they felt this additional responsibility because of this weight, that they were being representative of women breaking barriers in traditionally male-dominated industries. So from that, I'm just going to briefly talk about some of the advice that they had received, both poor advice they had received and that they learned from, or maybe they didn't follow, and then some good advice that they received. So one of those was, again, from Claire. She talked about the fact that she was often told that she, as a startup founder, she had to be living this startup 24/7. And she thinks that there is some of that when you start a company, but to stay sane, it's important to be away and to try other things and not let it completely overtake you, because, and I really like this quote, being miserable does not equal being productive. So you may be told you have to live and breathe this, but it actually may be better for you and for the company to be able to take steps back from it. Another quote comes from Jen Silva. She's at WashU. She said that the worst advice came during a financing round, and she was told that she needed to accept the terms and all would be fine with it at the end of the day. And this was early on, and she wasn't savvy enough to ask about the waterfall model that was going to happen based on this financing and how the future looks and what that would impact. And so she didn't ask questions about the equity of the financing, and it actually caused some cap table problems for them. So she felt like it was a good lesson that she could have educated herself more on this, perhaps asked more people about advice. And she felt that it was a painful lesson because every time she looked at the cap table, she was seeing this thing that didn't turn out as well for her company. So this is a quote from Daria, who I mentioned earlier. Some bad advice that she received was to lower her voice, speak more slowly, and don't use your hands. And she says, no way, be yourself. If you're taking on a different persona as an entrepreneur, it's only going to last for a short time. You should better stay true to yourself. When investors are looking at you to invest in you, they want to know the person is that they're investing in. So don't try to be somebody else, be who you are. This is from Laura Schul. She said, many people told me you need an experienced CEO, but I've learned to disagree with that. You need someone in your company who has done this before, but it doesn't necessarily need to be the CEO. So Laura was a graduate student when she founded her company, went on to become the CEO and kind of lived and breathed the company for many years until it was acquired. This was actually a startup company that we invested in and exited out of a few years ago when the company was acquired. And last piece of poor advice is from Stephanie Carlson. Some people at the beginning emphasized how lean we need to be as a company, and she can understand that rationale. But for women and minorities especially, she noted that the metaphorical trap is that you can end up for asking a seat at the table while promising not to eat too much. And this can perpetuate inequity. And so make sure, even that you are being lean, that you're being appropriately compensated for what it is that you are doing with the company. So valuable advice that they received. Clara Watts again here says, don't be afraid to pivot. If for any founder, you have ownership over your technology, it is your baby. It's easy to get attached to that vision and not want to waver off of it. But ultimately, the second you start selling your technology, receiving investment, it's not totally your own anymore. And you need to listen to your customers, investors, and end users. On a totally different area, Lindsay Linke, the co-founder and CEO of Cyvec, said, lean on other women. Find other women who have gone through this, and don't be afraid to be transparent about your experiences, good and bad. She talks about how being vulnerable with each other helps you learn from each other, and they're going to support you along the way. It's okay to have those feelings and experiences. And hopefully some of our equalizers got that sense, especially from being at the in-person day together. Additional valuable advice, again, Daria Mosley Rosen, she mentioned about use every opportunity to learn when you're meeting with someone. Know as much about them as that you know a little bit about them before you go into the meeting, so that you have some common ground that you're working on, and make sure you got everything that you think you could out of the meeting, including asking them, what didn't I ask you? Is there something that I should have been asking you that would have, you think that, considering what it is that I'm doing, that would have been useful? Laura Schul said that some good advice that she received was that her initial business model was too complicated, and you can only have one business in a startup. If you can't say exactly who is going to pay you and why they are going to pay you a reasonable amount of money, sorry, then you don't have a business yet. You need to understand how the money flows. So this is their direct advice to women who are considering startup companies. So this is Janelle Malloy from Wild Dog Physics. So in both she and Laura touched on this, is that you shouldn't start a company just to start a company and put it on your resume. You have to have good reasons that you want to do this. So Janelle noted that she feels like there's this nationwide push always to encourage you to be an entrepreneur, and that you're going to tell it like, this is great, you should do it, etc. But sometimes entrepreneurship may or may not be for you. You may be happier in academia, you may be happier not juggling all of this, but you have to understand reasons why you're doing it and what makes you happy. Laura Schul has talked about something similarly, that, don't start a company just because you want to, like I said. Starting a company is really risky. you are risking potentially your financial future because you have to have some wherewithal to be able to go forward with your company and be able to maybe earn a living or maybe even go without a paycheck for a while as you are starting that particular company. It depends on what it is that you are doing with it. So just be thinking about that as well. Obviously, choose your team wisely. We talked about this a lot in Equalize this year. Stephanie Carlson noted, and she actually talked about how she found it difficult, I think, initially on the mentors side and finding that, but there are mentors out there and resources if you're proactive. Obviously, all of our equalizers were incredibly proactive and sticking with it through so much effort this year. 17 training sessions, which we've never had that many training sessions before. And they were there for the majority of those, like the vast majority of people were showing up for every one of those and absorbing it all in. Muriel Merdad, co-founder of Codon, said she mentioned about when you're choosing your team, gauge carefully who you partner with. You may have blinders on or lack perspective for a person who's a wonderful friend, but they may not be a good business partner. So just be very considerate about who it is that you're bringing on your team, that they have the expertise that you're looking for, and that they're committed to this in the same respect that you are. The last slide I have on this, and then we will get to our conversation, which is direct advice. Trust your instincts and take action. So all these people were basically saying, if you have the inkling to do this, go ahead and try it. Be willing to take the risk, Melissa Krebs said. Who knows what can happen? Regardless of the company outcome, she's learned so much, and it's been a huge professional growth opportunity for her. Kei Young from BioDepot said her biggest takeaway was like, don't think about it too much. Just do it, especially if you feel like you have a good idea. And that her advice again was to bring on that good team that we talked about. And Daria Moshley Rosen will end with a quote from her: just jump in. Don't worry about failure, as it will happen. There's a great chance that you will fail. As we know, most startups don't end up making it to the point of being profitable, or sometimes even necessarily having a product that they're able to put out at all. But you will come out more knowledgeable and stronger, and you'll do it better the next time. Great. I am very pleased to have Laura Holberger with us. So we're going to have a brief 10-minute or so conversation with each other. And so I'm very pleased to have you here, Laura. She is the co-creation architect at Novo Nordisk's Bioinnovation Hub. She's here at Equalize today to talk with us about her work and experience in the biotech space. Laura, could you start off by telling us what the Bioinnovation Hub is and what your role is at the hub?
Yes, thanks, Kirsten. It's good to be here. The Novo Nordisk Bioinnovation Hub is an externally facing research and development unit that sits in Cambridge, Massachusetts. The hub is building an external portfolio of collaborations with startups and biotech companies and VCs and other members of the ecosystem. Together with these partners, we are creating therapeutic concepts which the individual parties would not have otherwise created alone. And we're working to encourage new approaches to chronic diseases that until recently have experienced a lack of investment due to long and expensive clinical approval paths. Our disease area expertise in the fields of obesity and diabetes, our clinical and commercial capabilities position us well to provide all kinds of opportunities for startups working on cardiometabolic diseases and other chronic illnesses. My role as the co-creation architect at the Novo Nordisk Bioinnovation Hub is to facilitate these new partnerships and to find new sources of innovation.
Great. And what better place to be looking at particularly academic institutions themselves. So obviously the cardiometabolic space, a huge area of interest right now in general. I know you've been working with startups and entrepreneurs for a very long time. Could you provide us a brief overview of your background of working with new company founders?
Sure. I started my career right after my PhD at a very early stage startup here in Cambridge. And from that position, I was able to experience a pretty challenging fundraising environment. It was in the early 2010s, and we had just experienced the 2008 financial crisis. It's sort of similar to the cyclical part of the cycle that we find ourselves in today, maybe. So that company had to pivot to providing services to other bootstrapping companies in our ecosystem. It started as Cambridge Biolabs. It became a company called Biolabs and then led to Lab Central. And actually, Lab Central was recently visited by the Equalize 2024 cohorts. So there's a little connection there.
Yeah, love it. Yeah.
Yeah. And these companies, these startup labs, they are a great nexus of different ingredients that make a good, successful startup work. So there you can find capital, sources of capital there. You can find academic research, certainly human capital, and state-of-the-art equipment. And through the growth of this organization and my growth within that organization, I got a great vantage point for hundreds of biotech startups at different phases of their development. So that was very cool.
Yeah, that is. Well, so considering your extensive work with startups, what are some of the attributes you see in founders who don't necessarily succeed, since that's not always within their control, but perform well as early company leaders?
It's hard for me to offer much in the way of better advice than I think we've already received today throughout the programming. But I think from my point of view, successful founders really focus on the people part of the business. They focus on the patients they wish to serve, the members of their team, and the network that they're cultivating. And that helps keep the company mission focused, which I think leads to a high level of motivation, both for yourself as a founder and for the rest of your team.
Absolutely. Yeah. So what are some common pitfalls then you see founders fall into in the biotech space? And then if you've touched on any spaces outside of biotech, any differences on those pitfalls?
I would have to say among entrepreneurs, it's probably sort of a lack of humility, I guess. I don't know, maybe that's not the exact word, but you need to have the self-awareness sort of to analyze your competencies versus skill sets you might have to seek outside yourself. And I think that among biotech founders, there's probably more of that self-awareness and humility than potentially other industries. And I chalk that up to, the high failure rate in biotech. People tend to be pretty realistic.
Yeah. Well, that's a good point there. Yeah, about that failure rate. Yeah, and often again, it's because of the science just not working. Obviously,
Yes.
when you're taking it forward, so you do have to be able to tough it out with that. Could you talk about resources you've seen that would be useful to company founders, especially first-time founders?
Yeah, and I think Sarah Fay mentioned a few of these in the context of a discussion about sources of capital outside of the seed and VC routes. And I think that founders really should seek out, whether it be philanthropic organizations or patient advocacy groups, high net worth individuals, and then there are government grants, of course, that are available to startups. The SBIR and STTR programs are very common and great programs. Of course, opportunities to participate in accelerators like Equalize, and these are also great because they're accessible to companies from all over. And just to plug my own work, I think that startups should definitely not be afraid to seek out strategic partnerships with innovation teams at corporates like Novo Nordisk, because we're always looking for some innovative ideas.
Great. Well, I'm sure if you share your contact information, you'll have some follow-up on that. So I know you're in the Boston Cambridge ecosystem, which is really vibrant. What advice would you have for company founders that may not be geographically located in such a hub?
Yeah, that's a good question. There are biolabs locations all over the country, and I think they've just actually expanded across the pond over in Europe. So there are sort of new nexus, new places to meet other biotech founders, hopefully in these different locations. But even no matter where you're located, I think it's important to have a virtual network, if anything, of scientific and strategic advisors, especially those that are specialized and known within your part of the industry. Um, these individuals are great sources of advice, but they're also good for their name recognition, which can help you market your startup with potential partners and investors.
That's really good advice. Yeah, thank you. Last question for you. We have audience members from all over the US and a variety of backgrounds at this event. Could you share your own thoughts on how to best support new time founders, what they could be doing to help out? Obviously, a lot of them already are supporters. That's why they're here. But any
Mhm.
other thoughts on that?
I would just say thank you to everybody here and ask they please continue engaging with startups and entrepreneurs as advisors and mentors, and contributing to Equalize is certainly a wonderful way to do it.
Well, and thank you so much for Novo Nordisk's contributions and support of Equalize. Really appreciate that as well. So, Laura, thanks for taking the time to be here today. And again, if people want to reach out to Laura, you can do so on LinkedIn or I'm sure through other means as well. Thank you,
Thanks.
Laura.